What I'm about to tell you isn't some made-up tale from a script. It's a chapter ripped straight from my own life, a living testament to what a broken man, pushed too far, is truly capable of. The day Sheriff Kalen Vane orchestrated the ruin of my family, he thought he was just clearing a path for his greed, stomping on an old man's legacy without a second thought. He underestimated the quiet fury simmering beneath decades of peace, the kindling waiting for a spark. That spark ignited when I watched my home, generations of my family's toil, swallowed by his ambition, and I knew, in that desolate moment, that my life's final purpose had been irrevocably set, to bring him down. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel. Tell us where you're from and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. My name is Silas Finch. For 69 years, I'd lived a life as predictable and unadorned as the Appalachian ridges that cradled our small town of Harmony Creek, West Virginia. My hands, gnarled and scarred, told the story of a lifetime spent coaxing sustenance from the earth, beekeeping, woodworking, tending a small vegetable patch that fed more than just myself. My wife, Ilara, used to say my hands knew more about honest work than most politicians knew about the truth. She passed on 2 years before the world, as I knew it, truly ended, and I often wonder if her quiet strength would prepare me better for the storm that was coming, or if it would have simply broken her heart all the sooner. Harmony Creek wasn't much more than a whisper of a town, nestled so deep in the foothills, you could almost forget the outside world existed. We had one stoplight, a general store that smelled of pine cleaner and stale coffee, and a church whose steeple leaned a bit further each year. For decades, our isolation was our shield, preserving a way of life that valued community, hard work, and the unspoken understanding that some things, like family land, were sacred. My land, a sprawling 80 acres, had been in the Finch name since before the Civil War, its soil enriched by the sweat of 5 generations. It was where Ilara and I had raised our only daughter, where her laughter still echoed in the oak groves, and where my beehives buzzed at the gentle hum of life. It was my sanctuary, my history, my entire identity. Then Kalen Vane rode into town. He wasn't from Harmony Creek. Not truly. He was an outsider, handsome in a predatory way, with eyes that held the cold, calculating glint of a serpent. He arrived 10 years prior, slick and charismatic, promising to modernize our Sleepy Hollow, to bring jobs and prosperity. He was elected sheriff with surprise and majority, a testament to his silver tongue and naivety of folks who hadn't seen his kind before. At first, he seemed a boon, fixing the potholes, getting a new ambulance for the fire department. But soon, the veneer began to crack. Whispers started of petty crimes going uninvestigated for those who didn't contribute to his various community funds, of zoning permits mysteriously appearing for developers with deep pockets, and of dissenters finding themselves with a sudden, inexplicable run of bad luck. Kalen Vane wasn't a lawman. He was a king, and Harmony Creek was his kingdom. I, like most, kept my head down. My life was simple. I had my bees, my woodshop, my memories of Ilara. I didn't trouble the sheriff, and he, for a time, didn't trouble me. We existed in a silent truce, the old ways and the new corruption coexisting for a while. That truce shattered one crisp autumn morning, a day that started with a familiar scent of wood smoke and ended with the acrid smell of burnt hope. I was in my apiary, checking on the last honey flow of the season, when a black sedan, far too polished for our gravel roads, crunched its way up my driveway. Kalen Vane stepped out, his uniform pressed, his badge gleaming like a malicious eye. Beside him stood a man in a sharp suit, a lawyer I'd never seen before, and a county official whose face was ashen, avoiding my gaze. "Morning, Silas," Vane said, his voice a low purr that never quite reached his cold eyes. He always called me Silas, not Mr. Finch, a subtle way of asserting dominance. "Got some news for you, friend. Important news." My gut tightened. I knew, instinctively, that nothing Vane considered important news was ever good for the likes of me. He unfolded a document, its edges crisp and official. "The county, under the authority of eminent domain, has deemed your property and several others nearby as critical for public safety and infrastructure development. Geotechnical surveys indicate significant unstable shale formations beneath your land. We're talking about a serious public hazard. Silas, for the safety of Harmony Creek, we need to acquire this property. Immediately. Eminent domain. Public safety. Unstable shale. It was a well-worn script, but the word still felt like a punch to the gut. I knew, just as surely as I knew the taste of my own honey, that there wasn't a single unstable shale formation on my land. I'd walked every inch of those 80 acres for nearly 7 decades. My father and his father before him had taught me the land's every secret, every gentle slope, every sturdy bedrock. This was a lie, crafted to steal. That's a damn lie, Kalen. I heard myself say, my voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor in my hands. This land is solid. It's been farmed for 150 years. My family is buried here. Vane smiled and faltered, but his eyes hardened. The reports say otherwise, Silas. Scientific data, verified by multiple independent firms. He gestured to the lawyer, who offered a flimsy binder. We've offered you fair market value, more than generous, considering the hazards. The number he quoted was insulting, a fraction of what the land was truly worth, let alone its sentimental value. It wouldn't buy me a proper chicken coop, let alone a new home. It was designed to be just enough to silence, but not enough to rebuild. You're trying to steal my home, I stated, my voice low, barely a whisper now. You want what's under my land, don't you? That's what this is about, not shale formations. Gas, or something worse. A flicker of something, annoyance, perhaps a fleeting fear being seen, crossed Vane's face before he reasserted his composure. Silas, I understand this is difficult, but the law is the law. You have 72 hours to vacate the premises. After that, we'll be moving in, for the safety of everyone. 72 hours. 3 days to abandon everything. 3 days to dismantle a lifetime. My legs felt weak, the world tilting. I looked at the old farmhouse, its porch swing still, the faint scent of Alara's lavender sachets almost discernible on the breeze. I looked at my apiary, the orderly rows of white boxes, each a thriving microcosm of life. My woodshop, filled with the scent of sawdust and linseed oil, where I carved memories into oak. All of it slated for demolition. I tried to fight it. God, I tried. I called the county clerk, a nervous woman named Maud who'd known my family for years. She stammered, apologized, and said her hands were tied. I drove to the county seat, spoke to a lawyer who took my meager savings, listened patiently, and then told me, with a weary sigh, that challenging eminent domain, especially when backed by public safety concerns, was a losing battle. Sheriff Vane has a lot of pull, Mr. Finch, he'd said, avoiding my eyes. The judge assigned to these cases. He tends to side with the county. It's a done deal. A done deal. The words echoed in my head, a death knell. The bulldozers arrived on the morning of the 4th day, the roar of their engines tearing to the quiet of Harmony Creek, like a physical wound. I stood on the dusty road across the valley, a small, solitary figure, watching my home being systematically dismantled. The porch swing, ripped from its chains, the windows, shattered into 1,000 shards of memory, the sturdy oak walls, splintered and torn. My apiary overturned, the angry, disoriented bees buzzing in a chaotic cloud of protest, their carefully constructed world brought down in moments. The woodshop, my sanctuary creation, crushed into a heap of kindling and twisted metal. It was worse than any fire, any natural disaster. This was deliberate. This was personal. This was Kalen Vane, asserting his dominance, showing us all what happened when you stood in his way. I felt nothing at first, just a hollow ache, an emptiness where my life used to be. The sun, usually a comfort, felt like a cruel spotlight, illuminating my utter defeat. I was a man dispossessed, a ghost in my own valley. My daughter, long grown and moved away to a life in the city, called heartbroken. But what could she do? What could anyone do? The days blurred into weeks. I found temporary shelter in an old, abandoned hunting cabin deeper in the woods, a place Alara and I used to visit for picnics. It was damp, cold, and lonely, but it was out of sight and, more importantly, out of Vane's immediate reach. I ate what I could forage, What little I had managed to grab in those 72 hours: a worn photo album, Ilara's favorite quilt, a few jars of my last harvest honey. Every morning, I'd walk to a ridge overlooking the valley, watching the slow, methodical destruction of my past, replaced now by the sterile, impersonal churn of heavy machinery digging deep into the earth. They weren't building a public safety initiative. They were drilling for natural gas, just as I suspected. Vane's company, of course, hidden behind layers of shell corporations. The anger, slow burning and steady, began to replace the numbness. It wasn't a hot, impulsive rage. It was colder, sharper, honed by grief and injustice. I thought of Ilara, of her gentle wisdom and her fierce loyalty. She wouldn't have let this stand. She would have told me to fight. But how do you fight a man who controls the law, the land, and the very air people breathe in Harmony Creek? One evening, staring into flickering flames of meager fire, I pulled out the old photo album. I looked at a picture of Ilara and me, young, laughing, standing proudly in front of farmhouse. Then a picture of my father, his face stern but kind, holding a small wooden carving he'd made for me as a boy. My gaze drifted to the back of the album, to a faded, brittle newspaper clipping from decades ago. It was a story about my great-grandfather, Ephraim Finch, a man known for his ingenuity and his stubborn refusal to back down. The headline read, "Ephraim Finch exposes timber baron scheme, saves local forest." He hadn't fought with fists or guns, but with wit, patience, and an intimate knowledge of his adversary. A seed, cold and hard, began to take root in the desolate landscape of my heart. I couldn't fight Kalen Vane with the law. He owned the law. I couldn't fight him with money. He had all of it. But perhaps, just perhaps, I could fight him with something else. Something he wouldn't see coming from an old, broken man. I started to watch him. Not just my land, but him from the shadows of the woods. I observed the gas company's operations, the trucks coming and going, the workers who looked away when they saw my gaunt figure on the ridge. I watched Vane's comings and goings, his house, his office. I learned his routine, his habits, the people he met. I was invisible, a ghost in the landscape, a silent sentinel. And slowly, painstakingly, I began to see the threads that connected his web of deceit. One rainy afternoon, as I was scouting near the edge of what used to be my property, I spotted Kalen Vane himself. He was not in uniform, but in a tailored suit, walking with the swagger of a man who owned the world. He was speaking animatedly with two men I didn't recognize, both equally well-dressed, but with a harder edge to their eyes. They stood by a newly erected sign, a grandiose proclamation of the Harmony Creek Energy Development Project. Vane laughed, a booming sound that carried on the wind, and then he pointed directly at the site where my farmhouse once stood. The two men nodded, their faces grim, and then one of them pulled out a thick envelope, passing it discreetly to Vane. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just about gas. This was about something far larger, far more sinister. And I, Silas Finch, a man who had lost everything, was perhaps the only one left to see it. In that moment, watching the crooked sheriff accept his dirty money on the very ground he'd stolen from me, a new kind of purpose solidified within me. The old Silas Finch was gone, buried with his home. What remained was something harder, something sharper, something far more dangerous. And I knew with absolute certainty that Kalen Vane had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He had taken everything from me, but in doing so, he had forged a weapon, an old man with nothing left to lose and a lifetime of quiet observation to draw upon. He was about to find out just how relentless a broken man could be, and I was going to make him regret the day he ever set foot in Harmony Creek. My justice, slow and meticulous, was just beginning. The old Silas Finch, the man who measured his days by the hum of bees and the scent of freshly cut wood, was indeed gone. In his place, a different kind of creature stirred within the hollowed-out shell of my being. The grief was a constant companion, a dull ache beneath my ribs, but it was no longer incapacitating. It was fuel. Every splintered plank of my home, every uprooted hive, every memory Vane had tried to bury under his corporate greed, had etched itself into my soul, sharpening a resolve I never knew I possessed. I moved like a ghost through the encroaching winter woods, my worn boots silent on the frost-hardened earth. The abandoned hunting cabin, my temporary sanctuary, became my war room. The walls, once adorned with faded hunting trophies, now held crude maps drawn on scavenged paper, connecting names and dates, times and places. My great-grandfather Ephraim's story wasn't just a memory anymore. It was a blueprint. He had fought wits with wits, knowledge with corruption. I had to do the same. My primary tool was observation, honed over a lifetime of noticing the subtle shifts in the land, the hidden trails of deer, the precise moment a honey flow began. Now, I turned that gaze onto Kalen Vane and his machinations. From my vantage points on the ridges, I watched the Harmony Creek Energy Development Project unfold. The drilling rigs, like skeletal giants, clawed at the earth where my apiary once stood. The air, once sweet with pine and honeysuckle, now reeked of diesel and the acrid tang of disturbed shale. Vane's power wasn't just in his badge. It was woven into the very fabric of Harmony Creek. He had built a network, a spider's web of fear and dependency. The general store owner, old Phineas, who used to slip me an extra bag of feed for my chickens, now averted his eyes when I ventured in for supplies. The few times I saw him, Phineas looked gaunt, haunted, as if the weight of Vane's presence was crushing him. The county clerk, Maud, had disappeared, replaced by a younger, sharper woman with an almost unsettling efficiency, whose gaze held no warmth. The judge who oversaw the eminent domain cases, Judge Eldrin, was a frequent visitor to Vane's opulent new estate, which had sprung up on the hill overlooking the valley, like a monument to his ill-gotten gains. I soon learned that the two men Vane had met on my stolen land, the ones in sharp suits, were not just investors. They were operatives for something called the Blackwood Consortium. The name itself had a dark, ancient ring to it, like a pact made in a shadowed forest. I overheard snippets of conversation, caught glimpses of documents through office windows with my scavenged monocular. The Blackwood Consortium was a shadowy entity, ostensibly a venture capital firm, but their methods, I suspected, were anything but conventional. They seemed to be Vane's primary partners in this energy development project, but the scale of their operations and the number of unmarked vehicles I saw at their temporary site offices suggested something far grander and far more insidious than simply drilling for gas. My nights were spent poring over old county records I'd managed to copy before Maud's departure, maps of forgotten mines, geological surveys from decades past. I learned about the deeper strata beneath Harmony Creek, not just a shale, but veins of coal, deposits of rare earth minerals, and whispers of old, abandoned mercury mines. This wasn't just about natural gas. This was about stripping the land bare, exploiting every hidden resource, no matter the environmental cost, no matter the human toll. One frigid evening, as I was returning to my cabin, a glint of light caught my eye near the old, abandoned logging road that skirted the Blackwood Consortium's main operations office. I hunkered down, my heart thrumming, and watched. A young woman, no older than 30, was furtively placing something under the loose bark of a decaying oak. She was dressed in worn work clothes, her face smudged with dirt, but there was a fierce determination in her eyes. I recognized her vaguely, Lyra Thorne. Her family had owned the small apple orchard adjacent to my land, a property Vane had also seized, though under a different pretext. Unsound water table remediation. Lyra's father, a quiet, stoic man, had been a vocal opponent of Vane's expansion. He had disappeared shortly after the land seizure, officially listed as having moved out of state for health reasons, a story no one in Harmony Creek truly believed. I waited until she was gone, her ancient pickup truck sputtering down the road. Then, cautiously, I approached the oak. Hidden beneath the bark was a small, waterproof tin. Inside, there was a crumpled piece of paper, covered in hurried handwriting. It was a note addressed to a kilovolt, detailing a delivery schedule for specialized drilling equipment that seemed far too heavy-duty for mere natural gas extraction. But what truly chilled me was a small hand-drawn map tucked inside the note, marking a spot deep within the old, abandoned mercury mines beneath what used to be Lyra's orchard. The coordinates were precise, and they led directly to the deepest, most unstable shafts. Lyra Thorne was an informant. She was working for Vane, or at least, She was seemingly reporting to him, but the way she'd hidden the note, the fear in her eyes, suggested she was no willing accomplice. She was under duress, trapped. Perhaps she was leaving breadcrumbs, hoping someone would find them. Or perhaps she was simply terrified and trying to survive. I didn't approach her directly. Not yet. I needed to understand her situation, her motivations. But I knew now that I wasn't entirely alone in this fight. Even if her involvement was involuntary, she was a potential key, a vulnerable point in Vane's armor. My observations continued. Vane's schedule was as predictable as the rising sun. He spent his mornings at the sheriff's office, his afternoons at the Blackwood Consortium's temporary HQ, and his evenings at his estate, hosting lavish dinners for various county officials and shadowy figures. He rarely traveled alone. His shadow, a hulking man named Jorek, was always by his side. Jorek had the vacant stare of a man who asked no questions and carried out every command with brutal efficiency. He was Vane's muscle, his silent threat. I also noticed a pattern in the Blackwood Consortium's operations. Certain trucks, unmarked and heavily guarded, would arrive in the dead of night, their cargo shrouded. They never entered the main drilling site. Instead, they would disappear down the old logging road, the same road Lyra used, heading toward the abandoned mines. And after they left, a faint metallic smell, not gas or oil, but something sharper, like ozone and rust, would linger in the air. My great-grandfather Ephraim had taught himself to read the land, to understand its secrets. I started to apply that same meticulousness to Vane's operations. I learned the schedules of the guards, the blind spots in their patrols, the frequency of the unmarked trucks. I needed to know what was in those mines, what the Blackwood Consortium was really after. One late night, under a sliver moon, I decided to take a calculated risk. I'd spent days crafting a crude but effective disguise, a tattered reflective vest, a hard hat I'd found discarded, and mud-stained coveralls. I looked like any other exhausted worker, emerging from a late shift. My face, gaunt and weathered, could pass for someone worn down by the job. I waited for the shift change, slipping past the weary guards, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The air was frigid, biting at my exposed skin. The logging road was dark, winding deeper into the hollows, further from the relative light of the main drilling site. As I approached the turnoff Lyra had marked, I saw it. A newly paved access road, expertly hidden from casual view, leading down into a ravine and towards the old mercury mine entrance. A chain-link fence, topped with razor wire, now surrounded the mine entrance. A single guard shack, illuminated by a harsh floodlight, stood sentinel. But the gate was open. A small convoy of the unmarked trucks I'd been observing was parked just inside the entrance, their engines idling, a group of men in heavy coats milling about. One of them, I could tell even in the dim light, was Vane. Another was Jorek. And the third, whose face I now recognized from my earlier observations, was Theron Holt, a smooth-talking, well-connected businessman from a neighboring county, rumored to have ties to various illicit enterprises. He was Vane's primary public face for the Blackwood Consortium. I crept closer, moving through the dense underbrush, my movements slow and deliberate, mimicking the stealth of a hunter. I found a hidden vantage point on a rocky outcrop, overlooking the mine entrance. From here, I could see and hear, though faintly, what was happening. Vane was speaking, his voice laced with an almost manic excitement. "Hope, everything is on schedule. The extraction rate is exceeding projections. We'll have the first shipment out by end of week." Holt, a lean man with a permanent sneer, nodded, a thick cigar clutched between his fingers. "Excellent, Kalen. Our buyers are eager. Just remember the parameters. No collateral damage, no loose ends. And the purity levels must be maintained. Our reputation and our profit margins depend on it." My blood ran cold. Asterisk extraction rate. Purity levels? Asterisk, this wasn't just about gas. They were mining something else, something valuable, something that required a shipment. And the abandoned mercury mines, deep and treacherous, with a perfect cover. I remember the metallic smell. As I watched, Jorek and two other men began to unload large, cylindrical containers from the trucks. They were heavy, requiring multiple men to maneuver, and they gleamed faintly under the floodlights. These weren't gas lines. These weren't drilling tools. These were storage containers, specifically designed for hazardous materials. My mind raced, trying to put the pieces together. Rare earth minerals? Highly processed metals? Mercury itself? The risks involved were astronomical. Then Vane turned, his gaze sweeping over the scene, a satisfied smirk on his face. And the other matter, Theron? The local nuisance. Holt chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Our friend Lyra Thorne has proven amenable to our suggestions. Her cooperation has been invaluable. She's feeding us excellent intel on the remaining holdouts, the ones who still cling to their sentimental land. They'll be persuaded to move, just as you promised. A cold fury, sharper than any winter wind, swept through me. Lyra wasn't leaving breadcrumbs. She was a pawn, forced to betray her own community, her own family, to save herself, or perhaps to save someone else. Her notes, which I'd interpreted as clues, were actually reports to Vane, detailing the dwindling resistance. My heart sank, a bitter taste rising in my throat. I had misjudged her, and in doing so, I had underestimated the depth of Vane's cruelty. He had twisted her, broken her, and was now using her as a weapon against her own people. Vane then lowered his voice, speaking to Holt with conspiratorial tone that barely carried on the wind. And the disposal of the waste from the deeper shafts? We can't have any trace of it. Not here, not anywhere near Harmony Creek. I've heard whispers of a new landfill site, upstate, less scrutinized. Holt waved a dismissive hand. That's Jorik's department. He's already made arrangements. Rest assured, Kalen, our footprint will be immaculate. Environmentally sound, on paper, of course. He winked, and both men laughed, a chilling sound in the desolate night. Disposal of waste. Deeper shafts. Environmentally sound, on paper. The implications hit me like a physical blow. They weren't just taking something out of the ground. They were putting something back in. Toxic waste. In a county known for its fragile water tables. Its interconnected underground rivers. This wasn't just about greed. It was about outright poison the land, the very source of life for Harmony Creek, for generations to come, all to cover their tracks. My stomach churned. This wasn't just my personal revenge anymore. This was about saving Harmony Creek, saving the people who were still here, the ones Vane was slowly, systematically destroying. And Lyra, trapped in Vane's web, was a victim, not an accomplice. I had to help her, and through her, expose the true scope of Vane's depravity. As I watched the men continue their clandestine operation, I noticed Vane pointing towards a particularly deep crevice near the mine entrance, a fissure in the rock that looked unstable even to my untrained eye. "Jorik," Vane commanded, his voice carrying clearer now as he gestured wildly. "I want that section reinforced." And quietly, "We can't risk a collapse, not with what we got down there." The old man, Finch, he always claimed this whole area was unstable. Wouldn't surprise me if he tried something foolish. Keep an eye out, and if you see him, make sure he disappears. Jorik grunted an affirmative, his eyes scanning the surrounding woods, a predatory glint in them. My heart leaped into my throat. He knew I was still around. He suspected I might interfere. And he had just ordered my execution. The game had just changed. This wasn't just observation anymore. This was survival. I was no longer a ghost. I was a target. I crept back, my senses on high alert, every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sounding like a death knell. I had found what they were hiding, and it was far worse than I could have imagined. They were extracting something incredibly valuable, something that generated toxic waste, and they were dumping that waste back into the very earth that sustained Harmony Creek. And Lyra Thorne, the quiet girl from the apple orchard, was caught in the middle, forced to facilitate the destruction of her home, her community. I reached the safety of my cabin, my breath ragged, my body trembling, not from cold, but from a mixture of fear and righteous indignation. The crude maps on my walls suddenly seemed insufficient. I needed more. I needed proof. Irrefutable proof that Vane and Blackwood Consortium were poisoning Harmony Creek. My gaze fell upon Ephraim's faded newspaper clipping. Asterisk, Ephraim Finch exposes timber baron scheme, saves local forests. Asterisk, he had fought with evidence, with truth. I had to find a way to get inside, to document what they were doing, to gather undeniable proof of the toxic dumping, of the true nature of their extraction. But how? The mine was a fortress, guarded by Vane's enforcers, and I was now a marked man. A plan, dangerous and desperate, began to form in my mind, coalescing around Lyra Thorne. She was inside. She knew the schedules, the weak points, the secrets. She was my only hope. I had to make contact, to convince her that there was another way, a way out of Vane's clutches. But first, I needed to get close to her without alerting Vane. And I needed to do it before Harmony Creek became a toxic wasteland. The thought of my bees, confused and dying in their overturned hives, fueled my resolve. The memory of Alara's laughter, echoing in the now poisoned air, solidified it. Kalen Vane had taken my home, tried to bury my past, and now he was trying to bury Harmony Creek itself. But I was still here, and I was coming for him. My revenge would not just be for my family, but for an entire community. And it would start with infiltrating the heart of his poison, with the help of a terrified young woman. The air outside my cabin grew colder, but fire, fierce and unyielding, now burned in my chest. The coming days would be the most dangerous of my life, but I had nothing left to lose, and everything to fight for. The war had truly begun. The raw shock of Vane's words, the casual dismissal of human life, of my life, had jolted me back to the edge of despair, replacing it with a cold, righteous fire. Lyra Thorne, trapped in a web of deceit, was not a willing participant, but a tool in Vane's poisoned hand. And I, a ghost in my own valley, was now a hunted man. The war had begun, and I was deep behind enemy lines. The abandoned cabin, my sanctuary, became a fortress of intellect. I traced and retraced the crude maps on the walls, adding new details, new conjectures. Vane wasn't just exploiting the land. He was exploiting its people, twisting their fears and their loyalties. Lyra was the proof of that. Her forced complicity was a testament to his insidious power, a power I was now determined to dismantle piece by agonizing piece. My days were a grueling rhythm of observation and planning. I moved with the stealth of a predator, my old bones protesting the cold, the constant strain, but my will overriding every ache. I watched Lyra Thorne, her small, weathered house, nestled amongst the skeletal remains of her family's apple orchard, was a beacon of forced solitude. She moved through her days with a haunted grace, her shoulders hunched, her gaze often fixed on the distant, churning mind sight. She was a bird caught in a cage, fluttering against invisible bars. I needed to reach her, to cut through the fear and distrust that Vane had so carefully cultivated. But every approach was fraught with peril. Jorik, Vane's hulking shadow, seemed to be everywhere. He patrolled the roads, his black pickup truck a constant, ominous presence. He'd occasionally linger near Lyra's property, a silent, menacing reminder of her obligations. And the mine itself was a hive of activity, constantly guarded, the roar of machinery a ceaseless thrum against the ancient quiet of the mountains. My first attempt to make contact was clumsy, born more of desperation than strategy. I'd seen Lyra leave her house one morning, heading toward the old logging road, a faded canvas bag slung over her shoulder. She was walking, not driving, which was unusual. I followed, keeping a safe distance, convinced this was my chance. She walked to a small, isolated clearing where a gnarled old sycamore stood, its bark peeling like ancient skin. She knelt, digging a small hole at its base, and carefully buried a small, cloth-wrapped parcel. Then she straightened, looked around furtively, and hurried back the way she came. My heart hammered. Was this another drop for Vane? Or was she trying to hide something from him? I waited until she was long gone, the silence of the woods pressing in. I approached the sycamore, my hands trembling slightly as I dug at the soft earth. My fingers closed around the cloth parcel. Inside, nestled amongst dried lavender, was a child's wooden bird, carved with exquisite detail, its wings outstretched as if in flight. It was beautiful, a piece of art, and beneath it, a tiny, folded piece of paper. My hands, gnarled and scarred, carefully unfolded the note. It was a child's drawing, a crude but earnest depiction of a small girl with long braids holding a bright red apple. And underneath, in a shaky, childlike script, "For Papa, I miss you." A wave of sorrow, sharp and unexpected, washed over me. This wasn't an intel drop. This was a memorial, a desperate act of remembrance. Lyra's father hadn't just moved out of state. He was gone, dead most likely. And Vane had used his disappearance to control Lyra, to force her complicity. The wooden bird, the lavender, these were tokens of grief, not treachery. My earlier judgment of her had been a stark injustice. She wasn't simply a pawn. She was a victim, coerced into aiding her tormentor, her heart broken, her spirit likely shattered. I reburied the parcel, carefully replacing the earth. My resolve hardened, infused now with a new layer of empathy and an even deeper loathing for Vane. I would not only expose him, I would free Lyra. The days that followed were a blur of growing urgency. The mine's operations intensified. The earth itself seemed to groan under the strain. I started seeing changes in the small, meandering creeks that fed Harmony Creek. The water, usually clear and cold, took on an oily sheen in places, a faint, metallic rainbow dancing on its surface. Small animals, raccoons, possums, began to appear sluggish, their fur matted, their eyes dull. A few local dogs left to roam fell ill, their owners baffled by their sudden mysterious ailments. The air, even at a distance, carried a faint, acrid tang, no longer just diesel, but something sharper, more chemical. Vane, meanwhile, was consolidating his image. He held a series of community outreach events, thinly veiled propaganda efforts. He spoke of sustainable energy futures, of bringing prosperity back to Harmony Creek, all while the true prosperity flowed into his pockets and the land withered under his touch. Judge Eldrin, Theron Holt, and other shadowy figures were always at his side, nodding, smiling, complicit in the charade. I needed to approach Lyra, but I needed to do it safely, subtly. A direct approach was too risky. Jork was always lurking. I needed to create an opportunity, a moment of solitude where she might be receptive, where she wouldn't feel watched. I started leaving small, innocuous things near her house. A jar of Wild Mountain honey, left on her porch swing one night. A freshly carved wooden bird, similar to her father's, but smaller, left beneath the sycamore. I wanted her to know she wasn't alone, that someone saw her grief and understood. I never saw her find them, but the items would disappear. A silent acknowledgement. Then, one evening, as dusk was bleeding into night, I saw Lyra leaving her house again, but this time she was carrying a large, empty basket. She walked past the sycamore, her head down, her gait heavy. She was heading toward the old berry patches, deep in the woods, a place I knew well, a place where the trees grew thick and the silence was profound. This was it, my chance. I moved with careful deliberation, a whisper of old leather and rustling leaves. I circled around, approaching the berry patch from a different direction, making sure I would be downwind, giving her no reason to suspect my presence until I chose to reveal myself. She was there, picking what few late-season berries remained, her movement slow, almost mechanical. Her face was smudged, her hair tied back in a loose braid. She looked utterly exhausted, burdened. I stepped out from behind a thick cluster of hemlocks, careful not to startle her, my voice low and calm, barely a rustle in the twilight. "Lyra," she gasped, dropping her basket, her eyes wide with fear, like a cornered deer. She clutched a hand to her chest, her breathing ragged. "Who's there? Show yourself." "It's Silas," I said, stepping fully into view, my hands held open, empty, in a gesture of peace. Silas Finch. Her eyes narrowed, shifting from fear to a flicker of suspicion, then recognition, followed by a deeper, more profound fear. "Silas? What are you doing here? You shouldn't be here. It's not safe." Her voice was barely a whisper, laced with genuine terror. "I know," I replied, my gaze steady. "I've been watching. I know about Vane. I know about your father." Her face crumpled. Her lower lip trembled. "You don't know anything," she choked out, her voice breaking. "You need to leave, Silas. Now, if Jorek finds you here—" "He won't," I interrupted gently. "Not if you don't tell him. And I don't think you will." I paused, letting the silence hang between us. "I know about the wooden bird, Lyra, and the note. I know he's got you trapped." Her eyes widened, a mixture of disbelief and a raw, wounded pain. Tears welled, spilling silently down her dirt-streaked cheeks. He killed my father," she whispered, the words finally tumbling out, a torrent of grief and terror. "My father found out what they were doing, what they were digging for, what they were planning to put back in the earth. He tried to go to the state, to get proof. Vane found out. Jorek took him. And then Vane came to me. He said if I didn't cooperate, if I didn't help him identify the others who might cause trouble, my little sister, Alara's daughter, she lives in Morgantown, he would make sure she disappeared, too. Just like Papa. Alara's daughter. My daughter. My heart lurched. Vane was not just a thief. He was a monster, holding Lyra's beloved sister hostage, using her as leverage. He had used the name of my own daughter, Alara, to twist a knife. The irony was a bitter, sickening taste in my mouth. My own Alara was gone, but her name was still being used by this devil. He said he'd make sure she died slowly, painfully, in an accident far away from Harmony Creek. Lyra continued, her voice ragged with despair. "I had no choice, Silas. I had to protect her. I have to." His eyes everywhere. "I know," I said softly, my voice filled with new, fierce determination. "But you don't have to do it alone anymore. I'm here, and I'm going to stop him. For your father, for your sister, for Harmony Creek, for my home." She looked at me, a flicker of something new in her eyes. Not just fear, but a nascent spark of hope, quickly overshadowed by doubt. "How?" "He controls everything. The sheriff, the judge, half the county commission. No one will believe an old man. Silas, no one will believe me. They will if we have proof." I countered, my voice firm, irrefutable proof of what he's doing in those mines. The toxic waste. The real nature of what they're extracting. You're on the inside, Lyra. You know things. You can help me get that proof. She hesitated, her gaze darting around the darkening woods, as if expecting Jorek to materialize from the shadows. "It's too dangerous, Silas. He'll kill you. He'll kill me. He'll kill my sister." "He's already trying to kill me, Lyra," I said, my voice grim. "He ordered Jorek to make me disappear. I'm already a marked man. And if we don't stop him, he's going to poison this entire valley. Poison your sister's future. Poison the future of every child in Harmony Creek. Is that a future you can live with?" Her gaze returned to ground, her shoulders slumping. The weight of her compliance, of her desperate attempt to protect her sister, was immense. "What do you need?" she finally whispered, her voice barely audible. "Everything," I replied, stepping closer, my voice low and urgent. "The mine schematics, guard rotations, the names of the chemicals they're dumping, the specific locations of the waste pits. What exactly are they extracting? I need to get inside Lyra. I need to get physical evidence." She raised her head, her eyes meeting mine, and I saw a new resolve hardening in their depths, a reflection of my own. "They're not just drilling for gas, Silas," she said, her voice stronger now, though still laced with fear. "They're refining mercury, old mercury, from the abandoned mines, and something else, something they call Element 19. It's incredibly rare, incredibly valuable, and the waste, it's a byproduct of the refining process, highly corrosive, highly toxic. They're dumping it in the deepest shafts, where the water table is most vulnerable. It's already seeping into the groundwater. I've seen the reports, the real ones, the ones Vane hides from the public. Element 19. The name sent a shiver down my spine. It sounded like something out of a science fiction novel, but in Vane's hands, it was a terrifying reality. Refined mercury, rare elements, toxic waste. The scale of his depravity was staggering. How do I get inside? I pressed, my mind already racing, piecing together the new information. Lyra took a deep, shaky breath. There's a service tunnel, old and mostly forgotten, that branches off from the main shaft. It's barely big enough for a man to crawl through. It's supposed to be sealed, but I know how to bypass the old latch. It leads to the lowest levels, near where they're dumping the waste and refining the Element 19. Jorik rarely patrols down there. He thinks it's too unstable, too dangerous. He's right, it is, but it's the only way. When... "Tonight," she said, her voice firm, the fear still there, but now tempered by a desperate courage. "There's a new shipment coming in, a larger one. Vane, Holt, and Jorik will be preoccupied with the transfer. The guard rotation will be stretched thin. It's the best window we'll have. I can leave the latch unsecured. But you have to be quick, Silas, and silent. If they catch you..." She didn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung heavy in the air. "I'll be there," I affirmed, my voice unwavering. "And Lyra, thank you. You're doing the right thing." She nodded, a faint, weary smile touching her lips. Just save my sister, Silas. Please." "I will," I promised, a vow spoken not just to her, but to the memory of my own Alara, to the shattered piece of Harmony Creek. As I slipped away, back into the deepening shadows of the woods, my mind was a whirlwind of calculations. The service tunnel, Element 19, toxic waste. The scale of the operation was far greater, far more dangerous than I had ever imagined. This wasn't just about money. It was about power, about absolute control, about sacrificing an entire community for unimaginable wealth. Back in my cabin, the crude maps on the wall now took on a terrifying new clarity. I marked the service tunnel entrance Lyra had described, the approximate locations of the waste pits, the path to the refining station. I gathered my meager tools, my old hunting knife, a coil of thin but strong rope, a small, waterproof camera I'd scavenged from a discarded drone, and a few glass jars for samples. My disguise, the worn coveralls and hard hat, was ready. My heart hammered with a grim anticipation. This was it, the moment of truth. I was no longer just an old man seeking vengeance for a stolen home. I was a sentinel, a protector, carrying the hopes of a shattered community on my weathered shoulders. Lyra's bravery, born of a sister's love and a father's tragic end, had reignited a spark of defiance in Harmony Creek. As the moon climbed higher, casting long, skeletal shadows to bare winter trees, I made my way toward the mine, the metallic tang of the poisoned air growing stronger with every step. The roar of the machinery was a monstrous symphony of destruction. I could see the floodlights of the main entrance, the silhouettes of Vane, Holt, and Jorik, overseeing the new shipment, their figures like dark gods presiding over their unholy ritual. I found the hidden access road, then the old logging trail Lyra had described. The air grew heavy, thick with the smell of ozone rust and something else, something cloying and chemical that made my throat burn. My breathing became shallow, careful. The service tunnel entrance was exactly where she said it would be, partially obscured by overgrown brush, a rusting metal door set into the rock face. The latch, usually bolted shut, was now hanging loose, a silent invitation, a desperate plea for help. I pulled it open, the screech of old metal echoing unervingly in the night. A wave of cold, stagnant air, heavy with the stench of decay and chemicals, washed over me. Darkness, absolute and suffocating, stretched before me. Beyond that door lay the heart of Vane's depravity, the proof I needed, and the immense danger of exposure. I took one last look back at the distant lights of Harmony Creek, a ghost of the town it once was, a town on the precipice of ruin. My daughter's name, Alara, echoed in my mind, a silent prayer. I was going in, and there was no turning back. The darkness swallowed me whole, and I knew, with a chilling certainty, that the war had truly escalated, and I was stepping into its darkest, most perilous battleground. My life and the fate of Harmony Creek now hung by a single, fraying thread deep within the poisoned earth. The darkness swallowed me whole, a living, breathing entity that pressed in from all sides, thick with a stench of decay and chemicals. My breath hitched, tasting metallic, acrid. The service tunnel was a gaping maw, a wound in the earth, and I was crawling into its diseased heart. The old metal door, left ajar by Lyra, clanged shut behind me with a mournful groan, severing my last link to the outside world. I fumbled for the scavenged headlamp, its beam a fragile spear against the oppressive black. The tunnel was barely wide enough for my shoulders, the air heavy, stagnant, and cold. My hands, gnarled with age and work, now scraped against rough-hewn rock, feeling the brittle flaking of ancient shale. Every movement sent dust motes dancing in the beam, shimmering with a faint, unnatural iridescence. This wasn't the smell of honest earth. It was a reek of something dying, something poisoned. Lyra's words echoed in my mind. Asterisk, too unstable, too dangerous. Asterisk, she was right. The silence was punctuated by the drip, drip, drip of unseen water, a chilling reminder of the groundwater Lyra spoke of, the lifeblood of Harmony Creek, now under threat. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear and grim determination. I was an old man, out of my element, deep in the belly of a monster, but the faces of Alara, of Lyra's father, of my daughter, of all the innocent people of Harmony Creek, burned in my mind, a furious, unyielding fire. I crawled, inch by agonizing inch, through the narrow passage. The headlamp beam swept over crude wooden supports, rotting and termite-eaten, relics of a forgotten era. The air grew thicker, heavier, tasting of ozone and something sharp, almost electrical. After what felt like an eternity, the tunnel opened into a small, vertical shaft. A rickety, rusted ladder descended into the gloom. I tested the first rung, my weight creaking the ancient metal. It held. Down I went, the dust raining onto my hard hat, the darkness seeming to press in even closer. My muscles screamed in protest, but I pushed through the pain, fueled by a purpose far greater than my own comfort. At the bottom, another narrow tunnel stretched out, this one showing signs of more recent activity. Fresh boot prints in the mud, discarded water bottles, the faint hum of distant machinery. I was close. The tunnel led me to a vast cavern, a cathedral of greed hollowed out of the earth. My headlamp beam, weak as it was, couldn't reach the ceiling. The air here was thick with the scent of chemicals, acrid metallic, making my eyes water and my throat burn. But it was a sight that truly made my stomach churn. Before me, illuminated by a harsh, sickly yellow glow from massive industrial lamps, was Vane's clandestine operation. Giant vats, their surfaces gleaming with an unnatural sheen, bubbled and hissed, connected by a tangle of pipes and wires. This was where they refined Element 19, whatever monstrous substance it was. Workers, their faces grim and weary, moved like automatons, their respirators muffling their movements. My gaze swept over the scene, landing on a section where men in hazmat suits were operating heavy machinery, carefully pushing large, cylindrical barrels, the same ones I'd seen being unloaded, into a deep, ominous pit. The waste pits, just as Lyra had described. The pit glowed faintly, a horrifying, iridescent sludge slowly consuming the barrels. This was the venom Vane was injecting into the heart of Harmony Creek. My anger, a cold, hard knot in my chest, solidified into pure, unadulterated resolve. This was worse than I could have imagined. This was an ecological catastrophe in the making, an act of premeditated murder against the land and its people. I pulled out my scavenged camera, its small lens a silent witness. My hands, surprisingly steady, began to document everything. I zoomed in on the labels on the barrels, on the machinery, on the faces of the workers, on the horrifying sludge in the pits. Each click of the shutter was a blow against Vane, a piece of the truth captured. I carefully maneuvered closer, my boots silent on the damp earth, finding a vantage point behind a stack of empty crates. Then I heard voices, raised and arrogant, cutting through the hum of the machinery. Kalen Vane, Theron Holt, and Jorik. They were standing near a control panel, overseeing the operation, their faces illuminated by the eerie yellow light. Excellent, Kalen, excellent. Holt boomed, a satisfied smirk on his face, a cigar smoldering between his fingers. The last batch of Element 19 is even purer than anticipated. Our clients in the tri-state area will be ecstatic. The profits will be staggering. Vane laughed, a grating, self-satisfied sound that echoed off the cavern walls. "And the waste, Theron? Has George secured the new landfill contract upstate? We can't have any unpleasantness here. Not with the scrutiny we're under after that Finch nuisance." Jorek, a hulking shadow, grunted. "Arrangements are made, Sheriff. The new site is remote. No one will ever connect it back here. And as for Finch," he added, a cruel glint in his eyes, "I've been making sure to keep an eye out. He won't be a problem much longer." My blood ran cold. He was still actively hunting me, and the callous disregard for the toxic waste, the certainty that they would get away with it, twisted a fresh knot of fury in my gut. "And Lyra Thorne?" Holt asked, taking a drag from his cigar. "Is she still proving useful?" Vane chuckled. "Oh, Lyra is a treasure, Theron. So predictable in her desperation. Her little sister is the perfect leash. She's been feeding us excellent intel on the remaining problem families. We'll be acquiring the last few troublesome properties by the end of the month. Then Harmony Creek will be truly ours. The sheer audacity of it, the cold-blooded manipulation, the threat against Lyra's sister, it solidified my purpose. My revenge wasn't just for my home anymore. It was for every soul Vane had crushed, every life he had threatened, every acre of land he had poisoned. I needed more than just photos. I needed physical evidence. My gaze fell upon a discarded, half-filled waste container near the edge of the pit, temporarily separated from the others. It was risky, but I had to do it. Lyra's diversion, my desperation, Vane's greed, and the land's own ancient instability had converged, creating a final, devastating reckoning. I emerged from the tunnel hours later, battered and exhausted, into the pre-dawn chill. The air outside was still thick with the smell of smoke and disturbed earth. Lyra was waiting, huddled beneath the sycamore, her face streaked with dirt and tears, her eyes wide with fear and a nascent hope. She saw me, saw the camera, the jar, the grim resolve in my eyes, and a shuddering sob escaped her. "Silas, you did it." The explosion, the main entrance collapsed. The news channels are already reporting it. A catastrophic industrial accident. "It was no accident, Lyra," I said, my voice hoarse, my throat raw. "He's gone." Jorek, too. Her eyes closed, a silent prayer of thanks, a tear escaping. "My sister, she's safe?" "She is," I affirmed, my gaze meeting hers. "Vane won't touch her, or anyone else, ever again." The following days were a whirlwind. The evidence I provided, combined with Lyra's testimony and the undeniable collapse of the mine, ignited a firestorm. Federal agencies, no longer able to ignore the blatant corruption, descended upon Harmony Creek. Theron Holt, though he had escaped the mine, was quickly apprehended, his corporate empire crumbling under the weight of the undeniable proof of toxic dumping, illegal mining, and racketeering. The judge, Eldrin, and other complicit county officials were arrested, their networks of deceit exposed. Harmony Creek became a focal point of national attention, a tragic example of corporate greed and environmental devastation. But it was also a story of resilience, of an old man and a brave young woman who refused to let their home be destroyed. The land, however, bore the scars. The immediate area around the mine was a wasteland, forever poisoned by the toxic waste. The creeks, for a time, ran with an unnatural sheen, the metallic tang lingering in the air. The element 19 was still a mystery to me, but its extraction had left an indelible mark. It would take decades, perhaps centuries, for the earth to begin to heal. I never went back to my old property. The sight of the scarred land, the empty space where my home, my apiary, my entire life had stood, was too painful, too stark a reminder of what was lost. I found a quiet cabin on the other side of the valley, higher up where the air still smelled of pine and damp earth, where the water still ran clear. Lyra, free from Vane's grasp, her sister safe, dedicated herself to the slow, arduous process of healing Harmony Creek. She worked with environmental groups, testifying, advocating, fighting for the future of her home. She was no longer a terrified pawn, but a fierce guardian, a testament to the strength born from suffering. As for me, the old Silas Finch was truly gone. The gentle beekeeper, the quiet woodworker, had been replaced by something harder, something forged in the fires of grief and vengeance. I watched the valley from my new perch, a silent sentinel. The hum of the bees was a distant memory, replaced by the ghost of the jackhammer's roar, the echo of Vane's final, terrified scream. My hands, though they still knew the feel of wood and the warmth of a honey jar, now also remembered the cold grip of a crowbar, the tremor of a collapsing mine, the weight of a stolen sample. I had achieved my revenge. Justice had been served brutally, completely, but the cost was immense. The peace I once knew was shattered, replaced by a grim awareness, a chilling understanding of the darkness that lay beneath the surface, not just of the earth, but of humanity itself. I sometimes walk the quiet trails, my boots scuffing the fallen leaves, and look out over Harmony Creek. It's slowly, painstakingly beginning to mend. New life emerges, fragile but persistent. But the scars remain, a permanent reminder of the price of greed and the relentless, consuming nature of a broken man's fury. The valley survived, but it would never truly forget. And neither would I. The end. Moving with the quiet stealth of a seasoned woodsman, a skill honed over decades of tracking deer and avoiding bears, I crept towards a container. My heart hammered, adrenaline surging through my old veins. The stench was overpowering now, burning my nostrils, making my head swim. I fumbled in my pocket for one of the glass jars. With trembling hands, I quickly scooped a sample of the glowing, viscous sludge, screwing the lid on tight. This, combined with the photographs, would be irrefutable proof. As I straightened up, my elbow snagged against a loose pipe, sending a small metallic clang echoing to the cavern. Jorik's head snapped up. "What was that?" he snarled, his eyes sweeping the shadows. Vane and Holt instantly turned, their faces wary. My heart leaped into my throat. I froze, pressing myself against the crates, barely breathing. Had he seen me? Jorik started to move, his heavy boots thudding on the damp earth, heading directly towards my hiding spot. I knew, with chilling certainty, that if he found me, my mission, my life, would end here, buried under tons of poisoned earth. Just then, a deafening explosion ripped through the air above, a concussive blast that rattled the very foundations of the cavern. Dust and debris rained down from the ceiling. The industrial lights flickered violently, plunging the cavern into momentary chaos before struggling back to life. A piercing alarm began to blare, echoing off the rock walls, a frantic, desperate wail. Lyra. She had done it. She had created her diversion. Vane cursed, his face contorted in a mask of rage and fear. What in God's name was that? Jorik. Go. Find out what's happening. Jorik, momentarily distracted, paused, his attention now split between the sudden crisis and the lingering suspicion in the shadows. He barked orders at the other workers, who were now scrambling, panicked, trying to secure the operation. This was my chance. The cavern was a maelstrom of fear and confusion. I seized the opportunity, not to escape, but to complete my grim task. My eyes darted to the unstable crevice Vane had pointed out earlier, the fissure near the main entrance to the mine, now likely compromised by the explosion. I moved, not toward the service tunnel, but towards the main entrance, towards the source of Vane's power and his ultimate undoing. The noise was deafening, the alarms shrill, the shouts of the workers desperate. I merged with the panicked flow of bodies, a ghost among the living, moving against the current. Jorik, still shouting orders, finally spotted me. His eyes, narrowed to slits, fixed on my gaunt figure, on the camera clutched in my hand, on the jar of sludge. "Finch!" he roared, his voice cutting through the din, a primal bellow of rage and recognition. He lunged, a monstrous blur of muscle and fury. I didn't run. I couldn't. My old body wouldn't allow it. But I had my wits. Just as Jorik reached me, his massive hand grasping for my shoulder, I ducked, slipping past him. His momentum carried him forward, and with a desperate surge of strength, I shoved a heavy, rusty crowbar, discarded by a worker, into the path of his swinging leg. Jorik tripped, stumbling headfirst into a pile of empty barrels, collapsing with a grunt of pain. He was stunned, but not out. I knew I had precious seconds. Vane, alerted by Jorik's roar, now saw me too, his face contorted with a mixture of disbelief and utter hatred. "You old fool!" he shrieked, drawing a pistol from his holster. "You'll regret this." I didn't answer. I just ran, my every step a prayer, toward the main exit, towards the unstable crevice. Vane fired. The shot whizzed past my ear, deafening an enclosed space, echoing with a terrifying finality. He was trying to kill me. I reached the section Vane had ordered reinforced. The massive fissure Lyra had described. The explosion outside had clearly widened it. Cracks spiderwebbed across the rock face, dust raining down in ominous plumes. I could feel the rumble beneath my feet, the very earth groaning under the strain. Vane was close behind, his boots thudding, his breath ragged. He fired again, another shot splintering the rock beside me. I could almost feel the heat of the barrel. "You're finished, Finch!" he screamed, his voice hoarse with rage. "This is my empire, my valley. You won't take it from me." I turned, my face grim, my eyes meeting his. I raised a small camera, a defiant gesture. "No, Kalen," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, though my lungs burned. "It was never yours, and now it will be your tomb." My gaze flickered to the heavy-duty jackhammer, used for breaking rock, abandoned near the crevice. It was still connected to a power line, its engine running on idle. Vane, blinded by rage, didn't notice it. He was focused solely on me, his pistol aimed. I dropped to one knee, grabbing the jackhammer, my old hands finding controls instinctively. My father had taught me how to operate these things, back when we dug post holes, when the earth was something to be worked with, not against, with a surge of strength I didn't know I had. I angled the powerful drill bit directly at the most vulnerable point of the fissure, a section of rock that was already crumbling. Vane hesitated, a flicker of understanding, then pure terror crossing his face. "What are you doing?" he shrieked, his pistol wavering. "Return what you sowed." I growled and pulled the trigger. The jackhammer roared to life, a monstrous tremor shaking the very foundations of the mine. The drill bit into the rock, tearing, gouging, sending a shower of sparks and dust into the air. The cracks in the fissure widened, grew longer, deeper. A low, guttural groan emanated from the earth itself. Vane screamed, a sound of pure, unadulterated fear, realizing his imminent doom. He tried to turn, to run, but it was too late. The ceiling above the crevice, already weakened by Vane's own reckless drilling, already compromised by Lyra's diversion, already further destabilized by my desperate act, gave way with a thunderous roar. Tons of rock, earth, and debris cascaded down, a terrifying avalanche of destruction. Vane was caught in the torrent, his screams abruptly cut short as he was swallowed by the collapsing earth, buried alive in the very mine he had sought to exploit and poison. Jorik, still dazed, had managed to scramble away, but fresh tremor sent another wave of debris, burying him beneath a fresh pile of rock and equipment. Theron Holt, the corporate face, had vanished in the initial chaos, likely scrambling through another exit, but his operation was now compromised, its heart ripped out. I stumbled back, coughing, my body aching, the dust and smoke thick in my lungs. The roar of the collapse slowly subsided, replaced by an eerie, ringing silence, broken only by the distant, dying wail of the alarm system. The main entrance, Vane's primary artery of greed, was now sealed, a tomb for the man who had defied the very earth beneath his feet. My revenge was complete. Kalen Vane, the man who had stolen my home, desecrated my land, and threatened my family, was gone, consumed by the very earth he had sought to destroy. Poetic justice, etched in stone and dust. I turned, my body trembling, my energy spent, and began the arduous journey back through the service tunnel. The sample jar was still clutched in one hand, the camera in the other. Proof.